She was born to be a queen, but today she's holding a sword, standing in front of an entire kingdom ready to tear her apart. Betrayed by her own father, forced into a marriage that was nothing but a death sentence, she makes one choice that will change everything: to fight back. And when blood spills on the royal floor, there's no turning back. This is a story about power, truth, and the price of freedom. If you believe no one should be a prisoner of their own destiny, comment, "I choose freedom." The bells of Eldravar tolled heavy, echoing like thunder across the marble halls of the royal palace. Their sound wasn't of celebration, it was a funeral song for freedom. From her chamber window, Princess Saria stood motionless, hands clenched at her sides, watching the courtyard below. Soldiers in gleaming silver armor adjusted their saddles, lined in perfect formation. Servants rushed, securing bolts of silk to the royal carriage, gold-trimmed, polished, and beautiful. But today, it felt like a coffin on wheels. Her eyes drifted to the banners, deep crimson embroidered with the golden sigil of Eldravar, the soaring falcon. They whipped violently in the cold wind, as if even the fabric itself resisted what was to come. She exhaled sharply, jaw tight. Her reflection stared back in the glass, a woman dressed in white and gold, flawless in appearance, yet hollow within. A knock. Her maid entered, bowing her head, voice trembling. "Your Highness, it's time." Saria didn't answer. Her mind was elsewhere, with the man awaiting her at the end of this journey, Rainer, King of the Iron Dominion, a name whispered with dread in every corner of the continent. A man whose hands were as red as the banners he forced conquered kingdoms to fly. They said he killed his first queen for questioning him during a banquet, strangled her where she stood. The second, burned alive. The third, no one even knew where her body lay. And now, Saria would be the fourth. This marriage was not a choice, it was a sentence, a pact signed not with ink, but with the desperation of a kingdom teetering on the brink of war. Her father, King Eldric, had stood tall when he told her, "Your sacrifice will save Eldravar. You are the key to peace." But as the icy wind whipped through the trees, Saria realized this wasn't peace. This was surrender. The carriage jolted forward. Soldiers flanked both sides as the royal procession rolled through the stone gates, heading into the shadowed forests that marked the borderlands. A strange feeling stirred in her chest, a cold, creeping unease. The deeper they rode into the woods, the more the world seemed to change. The sunlight thinned, shadows lengthened, even the birds had gone silent. Then it happened, a scream, not human, a war cry, low, guttural, rising into a roar that shattered the stillness. Arrows sliced the air. One struck the driver. He collapsed forward, reins slipping from dead hands. Horses reared in panic. From the trees, they emerged. Dozens, no hundreds, of figures clad in furs, bone and leather, faces smeared with paint, bodies scarred with the stories of 100 battles. The Skarn, barbarian raiders, wolves of the north. Steel clashed, men screamed. Her guards fought valiantly, but they were no match. Saria watched in horror as sword met flesh, as arrows found their marks. Blood splattered the white snow. Then she saw him, a towering figure cutting through the chaos as if born from it. His hair, a cascade of gold, tied back in leather cords. His body, a living weapon, each muscle sculpted by war. Tattoos curled across his arms and shoulders. Symbols of battles survived, victories stolen, empires defied. But it was his eyes that struck her still. Blue, piercing, icy, unforgiving. Eyes that had seen too much and had burned because of it. He moved like a predator, sword in hand, carving a path straight to her carriage. Saria scrambled back, heart pounding, hands searching for anything to defend herself, but there was nothing. The carriage door splintered beneath his boot. "Stay back!" she screamed, grabbing a silver hairpin, a pitiful weapon. But before the words finished leaving her lips, he seized her wrist in a grip of iron. She struggled, kicking, slapping, screaming, but he didn't flinch. "Let me go! You can't do this!" Her voice was raw, breaking. The man yanked her toward him, his breath cold against her ear. His voice was rough, deep, edged with something darker than hate. "You don't belong to them anymore," he growled. With one brutal motion, he hoisted her over his shoulder as if she weighed nothing, carried her to his black warhorse, and threw her onto the saddle in front of him. "Stop! No! I am the Princess of Eldravar." "Not anymore." His tone was final, absolute. As he dug his heels into the horse's sides, the beast surged forward. Behind them, flames licked at the royal banners, the sigil of Eldravar curling into ash as it burned. And as the forest swallowed them whole, so too did Saria's old life disappear, left behind in blood and fire. The snow bit at her skin. The wind howled like a chorus of wolves, sinking its frozen teeth into every inch of her. The cold was merciless, unforgiving, and so was the man whose saddle she was now tied to. Her wrists throbbed where the coarse leather bindings scraped the skin raw. Each jolt of the horse sent fresh pains shooting through her limbs. Her legs, stiff from hours of riding, trembled beneath her, but there was nowhere to rest, nowhere to hide. Only endless white, gnarled trees and shadows that whispered of death. Saria gritted her teeth. Her jaw ached from clenching it shut to keep from crying out, not from pain, but from the sheer humiliation of it all. She was a princess, a daughter of kings, born beneath banners of silk, raised among marble and gold. Now, dragged like spoils of war through the frozen wilds by a man who didn't even speak her name. Kyle. That was the name whispered among the Skarn. She'd heard it murmured between grunts, orders, and foreign words. The leader, the war chief, or something more. The others bowed their heads slightly as he passed. Not out of fear, but respect. His hand gripped the reins loosely, the other resting near the hilt of his axe strapped across his back. Muscles rippled beneath layers of fur and hardened leather. Every movement efficient, deliberate. He hadn't spoken to her since dragging her from the carriage, as if she were nothing but cargo. Saria turned her head slightly, forcing her voice past the tightness in her throat. "Where are you taking me?" No answer. Her lips curled in frustration. "Do you hear me, barbarian?" His icy gaze flicked toward her, just for a heartbeat, long enough for her to feel it cut straight through her like a blade. "You'll see," he replied finally. His voice was gravel, deep and sharp. The path twisted through dense woods blanketed in snow. The trees loomed like skeletal giants, their branches twisted and gnarled, heavy with icicles. Wolves howled in the distance, but it wasn't them Saria feared. The Skarn. They rode silently, men and women both, wrapped in heavy pelts, armed with cruel weapons, axes, long knives, spears tipped with blackened steel. Some wore masks carved from bone, others had faces tattooed with lines that told stories she didn't understand. Their horses were massive beasts, wild-eyed and thick with shaggy coats built for this merciless cold, and every single one of them looked at her, some with curiosity, some with hunger, but none with pity. Still, none dared approach her, none even attempted to speak, because she wasn't theirs. She belonged to him. The thought made her stomach knot. She tugged at the rope binding her wrists, biting her lip to suppress a hiss of pain. The skin had already split in places, blood staining the leather dark. Kyle felt the tension and pulled the reins sharply, forcing the horse to a sudden stop. The others halted as well, murmuring, watching. In a fluid motion, he dismounted, towering over her. His hands moved to untie the rope, not to free her, but to adjust it, looping it now to the saddle horn so she could no longer pull against it. "Stop squirming," he muttered, his fingers rough against her skin. "You're hurting me," she snapped, yanking her arms back instinctively. "Is that what you enjoy, watching others suffer?" His head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing. "No, but you'll survive. You have no right. Your king had no right," he interrupted, voice like steel, low but charged with something volatile. "But here we are." Before she could retort, He was back in the saddle behind her, his arm locking around her waist as the horse surged forward again. The hours blurred. Snow fell heavier now, the wind growing more violent, her vision blurred with exhaustion, hunger gnawing at her stomach. But sleep was impossible. Every time her head drooped, the jolt of the horse snapped her back awake. Just when she thought she could bear no more, they crested a ridge. Below, a hidden valley. Smoke curled from fires set in a ring, nestled among jagged rocks and dense trees. A camp. No, a village. Crude huts made of wood, fir and stone, walls of sharpened stakes surrounded the perimeter. As they approached, the Skarn dismounted, leading their horses toward the central fire. Kyle pulled her down, half carrying, half dragging her forward. Dozens of eyes followed them, children peeked out from behind their mothers' legs. Old men watched with hollow stares, their faces carved with age and sorrow. Warriors cleaned their weapons, some sharpening blades, others tending to wounded comrades. Saria stumbled as Kyle yanked her toward a post near the central fire. Without ceremony, he tied her hands to it, not cruelly tight, but firm enough that escape was impossible. Her breath came in shaky bursts, clouding the frigid air. She tried to stand tall, to summon whatever scraps of royal dignity she still had, but the truth weighed heavier than the rope. She was utterly, hopelessly alone. Kale crouched before her, meeting her gaze at eye level. His blue eyes weren't cruel, but they were hard. "You will stay here. You will eat. You will not try to run." Her lips trembled. "Why? Why me? What do you want from me?" For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze flicked toward the flames, as if searching for words buried in the fire. Then, slowly, he reached into the pouch at his side and pulled something free, a small pendant, aged and cracked, its chain broken. He tossed it into her lap. Saria's breath caught. Her fingers, stiff from cold, fumbled to pick it up. Her eyes widened as she recognized the seal engraved on its face. Not Eldrava's falcon, not Rayna's iron fist, a symbol forgotten, a crown split by a sword, surrounded by stars. A royal crest she'd seen only in forbidden texts, buried deep within the palace library. "This," she whispered, "this shouldn't exist." His jaw clenched. His voice dropped, a quiet snarl laced with centuries of pain. "It did, before your king's sword erased it." She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you saying?" Kyle rose to his full height. "My father was a king. Before yours slaughtered him. Before Rayna burned our cities. Before your royal blood paved the roads with ours." He stepped closer, towering over her, the fire casting shadows across the sharp lines of his face. "I am Kyle Vare, last son of the Vare bloodline, heir to the kingdom your people wiped from history." Saria's body went rigid. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned the howling wind. "No," she breathed. "No, that can't be true." "Your books won't tell you," he said, voice bitter. "Your historians won't. But the ashes still remember. The bones beneath your castles remember." She shook her head, but the pendant trembled in her hands. The weight of it was unbearable. A part of her knew, had always known, that the histories of kings were written in blood and lies. But to see the proof— "Rayna," Kale continued, his gaze turning sharp like a blade unsheathed. "You think he marries for peace? No, he marries for conquest. After you are his, Eldrava falls, just as my people did." Saria's breath came fast, shallow. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her. Her world, the world she thought she knew, cracked open. She swallowed, voice barely audible. Why take me? What is this to you? Revenge?" Kyle's expression darkened, but behind the ice in his eyes, something flickered, something that wasn't hatred. "Truth," he said softly. "And perhaps something more." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the cold scream of the wind. Then, without another word, Kyle turned and walked away, vanishing into the shadows of the camp, leaving her tied there, with a pendant in her hands and a truth that shattered everything she had ever believed. And in the depth of her soul, for the first time, Princess Saria felt something far more terrifying than fear: doubt. The kind of doubt that could burn entire kingdoms to the ground. The dawn broke, cruel and grey, stretching long fingers of pale light across the frozen ground. The cold was merciless, creeping deep into her bones. Her fingers were numb, her wrists raw from the ropes. Every muscle in Saria's body screamed in protest as she slowly stirred from the shallow, miserable sleep that exhaustion had forced upon her. She wasn't sure if it had been minutes or hours. Time didn't flow here. It simply dragged, heavy and suffocating. She sat slumped against the post where Kyle had tied her, her back stiff, her body aching. Her head throbbed from dehydration, from hunger, from everything. But more than the physical pain was the growing storm inside her chest, a mix of rage, fear, and confusion tangled like thorns beneath her ribs. The pendant still hung from her neck. She hadn't let it go. Couldn't. Its weight felt heavier than any crown she had ever seen, heavier than any expectation her father had ever placed on her. Because it wasn't just metal, it was proof. Proof that the stories she had been told were lies. Proof that the world she thought was carved from honor and peace was built atop blood and betrayal. Her fingers gripped it tightly as her eyes scanned the camp. The skarn moved like shadows, purposeful and efficient. Fires were being stoked, meat roasted over open flames. Warriors repaired armor, sharpened blades, or tended to injured comrades. Children chased one another between tents made of fur and wood. Women carried buckets of water from a nearby frozen stream, their faces fierce and proud. And all of them spared her glances, some filled with curiosity, others with barely veiled contempt, a few with something darker. She wasn't a guest here. She wasn't even a prisoner in the formal sense. She was a symbol, a prize, a living wound dragged into their midst, wearing the face of everything they hated. The knot in her chest tightened. No, she wasn't going to sit here waiting for whatever fate they decided. She wasn't going to let him control her. Her gaze scanned the post, the ropes, the knot. It wasn't the most complicated binding. Kale had tied it to keep her from running, not necessarily to torture her. He had underestimated her. They all had. Her fingers, stiff and trembling, worked the knot slowly, carefully. Her nails dug into the frozen fibers, twisting, tugging. It scraped her skin, reopening cuts from yesterday's bindings, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Her breathing came faster. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Almost. The rope gave a little, then more, and then it slipped free. Her heart slammed into her ribs as she pulled her hands to her chest, flexing sore, aching fingers. Her gaze darted wildly, searching. The nearest skarn were busy. One was chopping wood, another hunched over a spear. None of them were watching her closely. Not now. This was her moment. Saria rose, staggering for a second, her legs half frozen beneath her, but adrenaline surged, forcing them to move. She ducked behind a stack of pelts, then darted toward the tree line at the camp's edge. Step, don't look back, don't stumble, don't fall. Her boots crunched in the snow. Too loud. She winced, kept going. She cleared the first line of tents, then another. Her breath came in short gasps, every step shooting fire through her calves. There, up ahead, the river. Icy, dark, but not yet frozen over completely. If she could cross it, if she could lose them in the woods beyond, she had a chance. Her fingers found a fallen branch, sharp at one end. Not much, but better than nothing. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out the sound of her own footsteps. But then a shadow moved, a voice like thunder behind her. "Saria!" She spun, wild, brandishing the broken branch like a dagger. Her breath caught in her throat. Kyle stood there. His broad frame blocked the rising sun, casting him in silhouette. His hair was wild, wind-tangled, his blue eyes blazed, but not with surprise, not even anger. Something worse. Disappointment. He moved so fast she didn't have time to scream. His hand clamped around her wrist, twisting the makeshift weapon from her grasp as easily as plucking a twig from a bush. His other hand grabbed her shoulder, and before she could fight, he slammed her back against the nearest tree, hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Her hands shoved at his chest, her fists pounded, but it was like hitting stone. "Let me go," she spat, fury choking her voice. "You have no right. You can't." "Run again," he growled, voice low, deep, dangerous. His face was inches from hers, breath warm against her skin despite the cold. "And I swear, the beasts out here will feast on you before you take 10 more steps." "I'd rather the wolves take me than stay with you," she hissed, glaring into those ice-blue eyes. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved, their ragged breaths tangled between them. Her chest heaved, his fingers gripped tighter, and the world seemed to shrink down to nothing but the space between them. Then, hoofbeats, distant, approaching. Kyle's head snapped toward the sound. His grip loosened slightly but didn't release. A Skarn warrior sprinted into view, face pale beneath war paint. "Kyle! Riders! South Ridge! How many?" Kyle demanded without turning his gaze from her. "Scouts! 5, maybe more. Rayna's colors." His curse was a snarl deep in his throat. His eyes flicked back to Saria, cold calculation returning. "We move! Now!" Without warning, he grabbed her arm and half-dragged her back toward the camp. Saria stumbled, nearly falling, but he didn't slow. Chaos broke loose as the Skarn mobilized. Warriors strapped on armor, mounted horses, snatched weapons from racks. Orders flew fast in their sharp, guttural language. Fires were kicked out. Supplies bundled in seconds. Saria barely had time to breathe before Kale threw her onto his saddle once again, tying her wrists, tighter this time, to the pommel. "Let me go." "No!" His voice brooked no argument. He swung up behind her, arms bracketing her body, gripping the reins. "You made your choice when you ran. Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere they won't find us." The horse surged forward, hooves pounding through snow. Behind them, the camp dissolved into movement. A pack of wolves blending into the wilderness. Branches whipped past. The wind stung her face. She twisted against the ropes, but it was pointless. For hours they rode, through frozen marshes where ice cracked beneath the horses' steps, across rocky passes where the wind nearly knocked them sideways, through abandoned fortresses whose walls were broken skeletons of some forgotten war. And all along, Saria saw things, signs, villages burned to ash, their ruins half buried under snow, scattered bones, blackened stones where homes had once stood, skulls mounted on wooden spikes, their empty eyes staring eternally at nothing. She knew this wasn't recent. This was old, years, maybe decades, the aftermath of something buried in her kingdom's history. Kyle didn't speak. His jaw was set, his focus forward, but she could feel the tension in his body, not the kind born from danger, from memory. Saria finally broke the silence. "Why?" Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Why show me this?" He didn't answer at first. Then, after a long silence, he muttered, "I'm not showing you. This is just the truth your people buried." Her throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, wanted to scream that he was wrong. But the blackened stones, the charred wood, the bones, they didn't lie. As dusk began to settle, a thick fog rolled in, turning the forest into a grey, shapeless maze. Kyle slowed the horse, guiding it into a narrow canyon walled by jagged stone. They dismounted. He untied her wrists, though his grip remained firm on her arm. "We camp here," he said shortly. "No fire." "Why?" she asked bitterly, rubbing her wrists. "Because they're close." His gaze scanned the fog. Too close. He led her into a shallow cave, half hidden behind a curtain of hanging roots. The walls were damp stone, the floor uneven, but at least it was shelter. She sat, hugging her knees, shivering. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kyle dropped to sit across from her, his eyes unreadable. He broke the silence with words that sent a fresh chill racing down her spine. "Your marriage to Rayna, it isn't peace." His voice was quiet, deadly. It's submission. The treaty your father signed, it's a death sentence. After Reyna owns you, Eldravar falls, just like my kingdom did. Saria's heart stopped. You're lying. But her voice trembled. Kyle pulled a folded, worn document from the pouch at his side. He tossed it to her. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. She read, and the world as she knew it shattered. The treaty was clear, hidden in legal words, in clauses buried deep in the text was the truth. Eldravar's armies would be dismantled, its fortresses surrendered, its lands divided, and any resistance would be met with the same fate Kyle's people had suffered: fire, blood, erasure. Her throat tightened so much she could barely breathe. Her father had known. He'd signed it anyway, betrayal so deep it cut to her marrow. Her fingers trembled as the document slipped from her hands. For the first time in her life, she didn't know who she was. And for the first time, she realized she might not want to go back, if back even existed. The snow was stained with blood. The wind howled like a beast, swirling flakes through the narrow mountain pass, biting at exposed skin, numbing fingers, and cutting through even the thickest furs. It was a place of death, a place where only the desperate lingered. Kyle crouched on the ledge above the trail, his eyes scanning the narrow path below. He could hear them before he saw them, the rhythmic thud of hooves, the metallic clank of armor, muffled voices barking orders. Reyna's soldiers were closing in. Saria stood behind him, pressed against the rock, her breath shallow, her hands shaking, whether from the cold or the sheer terror crawling beneath her skin. She didn't know anymore. She gripped the pendant that hung around her neck like a talisman, as if it might somehow change the reality closing in around them. Kyle's hand tightened around the hilt of his axe. His jaw clenched. His breath was slow, controlled. But beneath it, Saria could feel it, the tension, the storm ready to break. "They're too many," she whispered. "Kyle, we should run." His gaze didn't shift. "There's nowhere to run." Her heart pounded. "We can try." "No," he growled, cutting her off. "Not this time." Below, the first soldier came into view, then another. 10, 20, maybe more. They moved in tight formation, the crest of Reyna, the black iron fist, emblazoned on their shields, their helmets shining like dark mirrors beneath the pale sun. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Elite hunters," he muttered. "Not scouts. Killers." Saria's pulse spiked. "They're here for me. They're here for both of us," Kyle said, standing to his full height, shoulders squared, like a wolf ready to sink its teeth into the throat of a bear twice its size. He turned, locking eyes with her. "Stay behind me, no matter what." Saria's hands balled into fists. Her throat burned with the sting of helplessness, of fury, of the crushing realization that her life had been nothing but a beautifully painted lie. She was supposed to be a princess, a bargaining chip, a silent pawn on a king's board. But now, the fire that had been smoldering inside her since that first night in the woods finally roared to life. "No," Kyle blinked. "What?" She stepped forward, shoving her hand against his chest. "I won't hide behind you." Her voice trembled, but it was firm, steady. "I'm not furniture to be moved from one master to another. Not anymore." His hand caught her wrist. His grip was tight, but not cruel. "You don't know how to fight." "Then teach me," she snapped, "or die knowing I'll fight anyway." Kyle stared at her. For a moment, the wind was the only sound between them. Then his lips curved, not into a smile, but something sharper, a grim, reluctant respect. "Fine." He shoved a dagger into her hands, short, curved, the hilt worn smooth by years of use. "Stay close. Aim for the joints, the neck, the side, the back of the knee. Don't try to fight fair. Fair gets you killed." The thunder of hooves grew louder. Kyle's voice dropped. "When it starts, you don't freeze. You move. You fight." Saria's fingers trembled around the hilt. She swallowed. "I won't freeze." And then the first arrow flew. Kyle's axe split it mid-air with a sound like cracking bone. His other hand seized Saria's arm, dragging her down the slope as the soldiers below realized the ambush was upon them. Chaos exploded. Kyle was a force of nature. He charged. axe whirling, cleaving through the first soldier's shield as if it were paper, burying the blade into the man's chest with a crunch of bone and scream of pain. He spun, dragging the axe free, and slammed the handle into the face of another. Saria barely had time to think. One of the soldiers lunged for her, sword high, teeth bared, and instinct took over. She ducked. The dagger in her hand lashed forward, finding the gap between greaves and knee. The man howled, stumbled, and Kale's axe finished him in a single swing. "Good!" Kyle barked. "Again!" There was no time for fear, only survival. Another soldier came. She sidestepped his swing, her blade scraping across his thigh, and though it didn't drop him, it slowed him. Kyle was there an instant later, driving his shoulder into the man, sending him sprawling before crushing his windpipe beneath his boot. Blood stained the snow. Saria's arms burned. Her breath came in gasps, her chest tight with exertion, panic, and a wild, almost terrifying exhilaration. Kyle fought like no man she'd ever seen. There was no wasted movement. His axe was an extension of his body, every swing precise, brutal. Where others would fight with rage, Kyle fought with cold, merciless efficiency, but they were too many. For every soldier that fell, two more seemed to surge forward. Saria was shoved back, barely dodging a sword that nicked her arm. She stumbled, her foot slipping on the blood-slick rock. Kyle saw it. His roar echoed off the cliffs. He slammed into the man charging her, tackling him to the ground, driving his axe deep into his chest. But in that moment, a flash of silver, an arrow. It buried itself in Kyle's side. "Kyle!" Saria screamed. He staggered, teeth gritted, blood soaking through the fur at his waist. Another arrow struck, this one grazing his shoulder, and a third hit the ground inches from his boot. "We have to move," Saria yelled, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him back. "Kyle, we have to go. He ripped the arrow from his side, blood pouring, staining his hand. His eyes were wild now, not with rage, but with sheer will to survive. "Move!" he growled. "Run! Run now!" Saria didn't think. She grabbed his arm, slung it over her shoulder, and together they staggered toward the narrow break in the rock. Soldiers shouted behind them, "Don't let them escape!" But the path was narrow, only wide enough for one man at a time. They slipped through, scrambling over the jagged stones, Kyle cursing beneath his breath, every step leaving splashes of blood in the snow. The mountain closed behind them, hiding them from view, but the sounds of pursuit didn't stop. Saria half-dragged, half-carried him as they stumbled through a forest of black pines. His weight was crushing, but she refused to let him fall. "You're not dying," she gasped. "Not here. Not like this. Keep moving." Kyle grunted, voice thick with pain. Branches slapped at their faces. The ground tilted sharply downward. She nearly lost her footing more than once, but forced her legs to keep moving. Her arms burned from holding him. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Finally, the trees broke, a hollow, ringed by rocks, half hidden from view. A cave entrance gaped at the far side. "In there!" Kyle rasped, nearly collapsing. Saria hauled him toward it, dragged him inside. The cave was shallow but dry, the stone cool but sheltered from the wind. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Kyle's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the stone, hand pressed to his bleeding side. "Kyle, arrow, clean through," he gritted out. "Not the worst." Saria's hands trembled as she tore open his furs, exposing the wound. Blood gushed between her fingers as she pressed them to the hole. Her stomach flipped, bile rising, but she shoved it down. "Tell me what to do." "Fire," he gasped. "Cauterize. Stop bleeding." Her vision blurred, but she nodded, scrambled for dry sticks, for flint. Her hand slipped, shaking, fumbling, but finally, mercifully, the spark caught. A flame flared to life. She grabbed his dagger, held it to the fire until the blade glowed red. Her breath came in harsh sobs as she brought it to his wound. "Hold still," she whispered. "Do it," he growled. She pressed the glowing blade to his flesh. His scream filled the cave, echoed off stone walls, pierced the sky. But he didn't pull away. He didn't flinch. His hands curled into fists, his teeth gritted so tight they might shatter. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. When it was done, he slumped back, breathing ragged, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. Zarya dropped the blade, her hands covered in blood, her whole body shaking. She collapsed beside him, pressing her palms to her face. Neither spoke for a long time, but something had changed. In the silence, in the ragged breaths they shared, something cracked between them, something deeper than the rope that once bound her hands, deeper than the lies of kings and the walls of kingdoms. She felt it in the way his hand, bloodied and trembling, brushed her wrist, in the way her fingers curled instinctively into his, desperate, terrified but unwilling to let go, and in the fading light, surrounded by blood and fire and a world hunting them both. Their lips met, not soft, not gentle, a kiss born of desperation, of defiance, of the raw, terrifying truth that sometimes, even in the heart of ruin, something new can begin. The wind outside screamed like a wounded beast, rattling through the crags and hollows of the mountain, as if the world itself were warning them that time was running out. Snow fell heavy now, thick flakes blurring the forest into a white void where shapes vanished and sound carried farther than it should. Inside the shallow cave, the fire sputtered low. The weak glow flickered over Kyle's face, his features sharp, jaw clenched, skin pale but alive. His body trembled beneath the layers of blood-soaked fur, but the bleeding had stopped. For now, Zarya sat pressed against him, one hand clutching his, as if her grip alone could anchor him to this world. Her other hand shook, though whether it was from exhaustion or the aftershock of what had passed between them, she couldn't tell. Neither spoke of the kiss, not yet. Maybe because speaking it aloud would make it real. Maybe because there was no space left for softness. Not here, not now. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of knowing they couldn't run any longer. Kyle stirred, a groan low in his throat. His eyes fluttered open, the blue of them clouded with pain, but sharp enough to find hers instantly. "We can't stay," he rasped. "Not here, Kyle." Her fingers squeezed his hand tighter. "You can't even stand—" "I will." His voice was iron, even when his body was broken. "If we stay, they'll find us. It's only a matter of time." Her jaw tightened. She looked toward the cave entrance where snow blurred the edges of the world, hiding dangers they both knew were circling like wolves. "They'll expect us to run north," Kyle said, pulling himself up with a grimace. "Toward the highlands, toward the Skarn lands. But we won't." His gaze locked with hers, hard, determined. "We're going south." Her heart stuttered. "South, back to Eldrava." His lip curled. "It ends there." Zarya's breath caught. Her chest tightened, caught between panic and something sharper, something dangerously close to resolve. "Are you mad?" she whispered. "There's no way back. My father, Rayna, they'll both kill you on sight." Kale's hand cupped her chin, rough thumb brushing the smudge of dried blood on her cheek. "Not if we make it first. Not if we show them the truth before they bury it again." The truth. The word sank into her skin, into her bones. The truth of Rayna's betrayal, of her father's cowardice, of the blood on the hands of every king who sat on a throne, pretending their crowns weren't forged from massacre. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, beneath the suffocating doubt, something cold and bright flared to life. "I won't be a pawn," she whispered. "Not for them. Not for anyone." Kyle's lips curved, not a smile exactly. Something harder, fiercer. "Then fight with me." Her answer wasn't words. It was the way her fingers laced with his, gripping tight. They left before dawn, slipping from the cave like shadows. The snow was their ally now, muffling their steps, covering their tracks. Kyle moved slower than usual, his body protesting every step, but he didn't stop, wouldn't stop. Neither would she. The journey was brutal. Days bled into each other, their world reduced to endless stretches of white wilderness, frozen rivers, and jagged cliffs. Nights were worse. No fires, no warmth, Only body heat pressed close beneath cloaks, and the constant terror of seeing movement in the trees, figures that disappeared the moment they looked. Sometimes it was wolves, sometimes worse. Twice they had to double back, narrowly avoiding patrols in black armor. Rayna's men, once they came across a village razed to the ground, still smoking, a warning, a graveyard. Saria stood over the wreckage, staring at the twisted remains of what had once been homes. Her hands balled into fists so tight, her nails cut into her palms. Kyle watched her, his face grim. "This," he said softly, "is what happens when kings fear the truth." She didn't cry. There was no space left for tears, only fire, only rage. By the fifth day, the mountains fell behind them, replaced by rolling hills dusted with snow. Far in the distance, the grey towers of Eldrava pierced the sky. Home, except it wasn't. Not anymore. Saria stopped at the crest of the hill, staring down at the city that had raised her, that had taught her how to curtsy, how to smile, how to bleed quietly behind silk and lace. "I spent my whole life in that place," she murmured, "believing it was something worth protecting." Kyle stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers. "It still can be." Her gaze turned sharp. "Not as it is, not with the men who hold it in their hands. Then we take it back." The plan wasn't elegant. It wasn't the sort of thing bards would someday sing about in honeyed taverns. It was simple, brutal, desperate, and it started with the wedding. Rayna had moved fast. Word had already spread through the outlying towns, messengers boasting of the royal union that would unite the kingdom. Saria's marriage was no longer a matter of negotiation. It was spectacle. A ceremony meant to cement the chains around Eldravar's neck, dressed up in ribbons and vows. And they were late, by mere hours. The city gates were heavily guarded. Kyle knew they couldn't walk through the front, but Saria knew the walls better than anyone alive. Knew every secret passage, every forgotten corridor, carved by generations of kings too paranoid to trust their own guards. As the bells began to toll in the distance, 12 strikes for noon, Kyle and Saria slipped through a crack in the wall near the eastern gardens, crawling through a tunnel half collapsed with age. Rats scattered before them. The air stank of mildew and decay. At the end of the tunnel, a rusted grate. Saria shoved it aside with all the strength in her arms, biting back a cry as rust tore at her hands. They emerged inside the palace grounds, hidden behind a line of hedges now heavy with snow. From here, the cathedral loomed, tall, imposing. Banners of both Eldravar and Rayna's dominion hung side by side, their colors bleeding together in the wind. The bells kept ringing, faster now, louder. "Come on," Kyle muttered, half limping, his hand pressed against his side where the arrow wound still throbbed. Saria led him through servant paths, past kitchens, through back corridors where no noble ever set foot. Her heart hammered, her lungs burned, but her feet knew the way. When they reached the main hall, the roar of the crowd hit them like a wave. Nobles packed the cathedral, men in velvet, women dripping in jewels. Soldiers lined the aisles. At the altar stood her father, King Eldric, dressed in ceremonial white, and beside him, Rayna, tall, broad, a predator in steel and silk. His silver crown gleamed, his mouth twisted in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The priest stood ready. An empty space waited for the bride. Saria stepped into the aisle. Gasps ripped through the crowd, whispers, screams. Every head turned. She wasn't dressed as a bride. No silk, no gold, only armor, leather reinforced with steel, a sword strapped at her hip, her hair wild and loose, face streaked with dirt, with blood, with defiance. Gale stepped in behind her, axe in hand, towering, grim, every inch the barbarian the court had whispered nightmares about. Eldric's face went white, his mouth opened, words frozen on his tongue. Saria's voice cracked like a whip across the cathedral. "Stop the ceremony." The silence was suffocating. She marched forward, head high, gaze locked on Rayna. "This man," she said, voice shaking with fury, "is a murderer, a traitor, a butcher of innocence. And my father, her eyes cut toward Eldrick, sold me to him knowing it. Gasps, shock. Rayna's smile curdled into a snarl. His hand went to his sword. Lies, he spat. She's delirious. She's been kidnapped, corrupted by... Saria's hand shot into her cloak. She flung the documents, pages weathered, blood-stained, undeniable, onto the marble floor. They scattered at Rayna's feet. "Read it," she demanded. "Read what you signed. Read how you traded Eldravar for gold, for power, for your own cowardice." Nobles bent, snatching the papers. Murmurs turned to gasps, then to shouts. A ripple of horror spread through the crowd. Rayna drew his sword. "So be it," he hissed. "If you won't be mine in peace, you'll be mine in death." Kyle stepped forward. His axe glinted beneath the cathedral's stained glass. "Try it." Steel clashed. The fight was brutal, a blur of blades, of roars, of crashing metal. Kyle drove Rayna back step by step, their weapons singing with every strike. The nobles scattered. Soldiers surged toward the altar, but some hesitated, confused, frightened by the truth unraveling before their eyes. Saria drew her sword, blocking a blow meant for Kyle, driving her blade into the thigh of a soldier who lunged toward her. She moved like fire now, fueled by fury, by betrayal, by the unstoppable certainty that she would never, ever be owned again. Kale's axe hooked Rayna's sword aside. He drove his fist into Rayna's face, then spun the axe and buried the blade deep into the tyrant's chest. Rayna's scream echoed once, sharp, before it choked into silence. He collapsed. The iron crown rolled across the marble floor, and everything, every lie, every chain, shattered with it. The cathedral was drenched in silence so thick it felt suffocating. The iron crown lay spinning across the marble floor, its echoing roll the only sound in the vast, hollow chamber. Saria stood frozen, her chest heaving, her sword dripping with blood that wasn't her own. Her fingers trembled, wrapped tightly around the hilt, but her gaze did not waver. Rayna's body lay sprawled near the altar, his silver-lined armor split open, his hands stretched in a final, lifeless reach toward the crown that would never again sit upon his brow. Kale stood over him, one knee pressed to the cold marble, his breathing ragged. Blood seeped from the reopened wound on his side, staining the fur at his waist. His axe hung loosely in one hand, but his other pressed hard to his ribs, teeth clenched against the pain. All around them, the cathedral remained paralyzed. Nobles cowered behind toppled benches. Silk-cloaked ministers pressed themselves against stone columns, eyes wide, hands trembling. Soldiers stood unsure, blades half raised, caught between old loyalties and the unbearable weight of the truth that now hung naked and ugly before them. Saria's father, King Eldrick, stumbled back against the steps leading up to the altar, his face pale as ash. His mouth opened once, then twice, but no sound came. His eyes flitted from Rayna's corpse to the shattered remains of the marriage documents now soaked in blood and mud. Saria stepped forward. Her boots echoed sharply against the marble, each step hammering through the silence like a drumbeat. Eldrick tried to straighten his spine, tried to summon the presence of a king, but it was hollow now, transparent. He was a man, no more, stripped of the illusions his crown once cloaked him in. "You," his voice cracked, "you ruined everything." "No," Saria said, her voice low, lethal. "You ruined everything. You sold Eldravar." "You sold me." His hands trembled, curling into fists. "You don't understand what was at stake. You've never understood. You were a pawn," she spat, cutting him off. Her eyes burned. "A daughter born for sacrifice. A pretty cage bird to trade for power. You think I didn't know? I knew. I've always known. But now everyone else knows too." A murmur rippled through the room. The nobles, most of the men who had bowed, scraped, and lied their way to power, shifted uncomfortably. Their gazes fell to the documents scattered on the floor, the proof, the betrayal written in ink and blood. Saria bent, picked up the iron crown where it had finally stopped rolling. She turned it in her hands, studying it. It was heavier than she expected, rough along the edges where time and battle had worn it, a symbol of everything wrong, everything broken. Kale straightened behind her, pushing himself upright despite the pain. His blue eyes found hers, questioning, waiting, and slowly, deliberately, she walked to the center of the cathedral, turning to face the gathered court. "This crown," she said, her voice rising clear as crystal, "has passed from hand to hand, king to king, tyrant to tyrant, built on lies, on blood, on silence." She looked down at it, then back at the crowd. "No more." Saria turned. Without hesitation, she crossed the floor to Kale. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She placed the crown in his hands. Gasps filled the air. A ripple of shock surged through the assembly like a physical wave. Kale stared down at it. His fingers curled around the cold iron, but his face was unreadable. "I don't want a kingdom built on ashes," he said softly, only loud enough for her to hear. Saria's gaze didn't waver. "Then build a new one." A voice broke the silence, rough, uncertain, one of the palace guards. "My lady, what happens now?" Saria turned toward the soldiers, the nobles, the trembling ministers. "You have a choice," she said. "Every one of you. You can continue this cycle, kneeling to liars, selling your sons, your daughters, your people, or you can stand. You can choose something better." A long silence followed. Then a sword clattered to the ground, then another. One by one, soldiers dropped their blades. Not all, not at once, but enough. Enough that the balance of power shifted in the blink of an eye. A noble near the front, Lord Meron, an older man with grey in his beard and more scars than rings, stepped forward. His eyes met Kale's, then Saria's. Slowly, he knelt. "My loyalty was to the kingdom," he said quietly, "not to tyrants." Others followed, not everyone. Some fled. Some clung to the old order, slipping out the side doors, vanishing like rats as the ship sank. But enough stayed. Enough bent their knees, not to a crown, but to something else. Saria turned back to her father. Eldrick stood frozen, staring at the scene unraveling before him as if it were some nightmare he could not wake from. His gaze locked on the iron crown in Kyle's hands. "This is treason!" Eldrick rasped. But even as he said it, the words were hollow, pathetic. "No," Saria said, "you committed treason. Against your own people, against me, against everything this kingdom was supposed to stand for." His face twisted in rage, but there was no power behind it, no one left to enforce it. "You," he seethed, "you would throw away generations of rule for this." His glare cut to Kyle. "A barbarian, a savage, a traitor's son." Kyle didn't flinch. He stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Saria. "My father was a king," Kyle said, voice low, hard as stone. "Before yours betrayed him, before yours burned my cities, murdered my people, erased my name." Eldrick's mouth opened, but no defense came. Nothing could stand against the weight of history finally dragging him down. Saria turned her back to him, not out of cruelty, but because he no longer mattered. His voice, his rule, his power, it was over. Guards stepped forward, not Rayna's, not Eldrick's. The city's own watch, whose allegiance had long been to Eldravar itself, more than the man who sat upon its throne. Quietly, without ceremony, they took Eldrick by the arms and led him away. No one tried to stop them. When the doors shut behind him, a new silence filled the cathedral. Not of fear, not of rage, but something different. Something like breath held, waiting. Kyle turned the crown over in his hands. Slowly, he lifted it, but not to place it on his head. Instead, he held it high for all to see. "This crown will not rule you," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "No man will rule you again. No woman. No king." Murmurs surged. "You will rule yourselves," Saria said, stepping beside him. "The days of thrones built on blood are over. This kingdom will belong to its people, or it will burn." There was silence. Then a shout from the back, a voice raised, trembling but fierce. "For Eldravar!" Another took it up, then another, until the cathedral shook with it. For Eldravar, not for a king, not for a queen, for themselves. Kyle let the crown drop. It clattered against the marble, rolled once, stopped, and stayed there. He turned to Saria, reached for her hand. She took it. Together, they walked out of the cathedral, out of the old world, into something new. The banners that once bore the crest of Eldravar were torn down that day. Not burned, not destroyed, folded, preserved, as a reminder of what was and what would never be again. The city stood, the kingdom breathed, the people, for the first time in living memory, chose their future. Saria and Kyle did not take a throne, they did not build one, but side by side they built something else. A life, a world where neither was a prisoner, neither was a pawn. A world where they were free, free, always. And maybe this is the true meaning of freedom. Sometimes breaking the chains doesn't mean sitting on a throne. It means refusing to let others write your story. What about you? What would you have done in Saria's place? Would you choose duty or freedom? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading everything, and don't go anywhere, because the next story is already on the screen, waiting for you. Just click and dive into another world of secrets, betrayal, and unforgettable choices.